What's up, everyone? My name is Matthew Dale, and music theory is a lot easier than you might think. And today we're going to take a look at intervals because intervals can really be a confusing topic for a lot of people. Now, before we dive in, I've got a free gift that I want to give you, my Essential Music Theory cheat sheet. This is a fantastic guide that gives you all of your major scales and your major keys at your fingertips, written out very clearly. All of the basic triads in those keys, all of the diatonic 7 chords in those keys, as well as a plethora of other foundational music theory concepts. Hit the link in the description below and download it after the end of this video. Now, the name of the game today is intervals. So what do I mean by intervals? If I just take our regular old C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C, an interval is just the distance from any note, let's say C, over to, I don't know, this G. That distance is something called a perfect fifth, so P5, and that is a type of interval. Now, here's the traditional way for looking at intervals. I'm going to get the old C major scale out of here, and now I'm going to write a chromatic scale. So C, and then C sharp, and then D, and then D sharp, and then E, and then F, and then G, and then G sharp, and then A, and then A sharp, and then B, and then we would be back to C. Now, these are all of the notes in our music system, in our Western music system. So notice there are natural half steps. The smallest interval we have in music is a half step. So B to C and E and F are natural half steps. We can't get any smaller in between. We can, but we just don't in our Western music system. So everywhere on this little chromatic number line or chromatic note line that I have here is a half step. So C to C sharp is a half step, and so on and so forth. Now, the traditional way of looking at intervals is this. Let's say we want to know what C over to this E is. And if we count the half steps, 1 half step, C to C sharp, 2 half steps, 3, and then 4. So that is 4 half steps. Now, 4 half steps equals something that we call a major third. But that's a lot of stuff. You have to memorize all of the intervals and know how many half steps there are within those intervals. But then putting that on an instrument can really be tough, especially something like, piano. You don't want to sit there and just try to count up the keys if you're looking for an interval, or guitar, which is, really convoluted when you look at it that way. There is a much simpler way for understanding intervals, and it starts first with understanding your major scales. Now, on this blank page, I'm going to just do some brief review. I have an entire video about major scales and how easy they are to construct that I will link in the end of this video. But here's just kind of a brief overview, okay? I'm going to go back to the idea of the C major scale for a second, which is just all the natural notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C. And like I said a second ago, the natural half steps are B to C, and E to F. Everywhere else, it's a whole step. So I'm just going to write W, H, and everywhere else, there would be a whole step. And then we have these concepts of sharps and flats. And a sharp raises a note by a half step. And then a flat lowers a note by a half step. So, as an example, G lowered by a half step would be a G flat. And that exists in the space between G and F. So that's all foundational. Again, I have an entire video on that I will link in the end screen of this video if you want to check that out. Now I'm going to get rid of the half steps and whole steps on here. And I'm just going to give these numbers, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then, of course, 8. And we can keep going if we wanted to, but we're going to stop there. That's really the first part of intervals, just counting the notes. And I've said this time and time again on my channel. Music theory is really 2 things. It's counting, which is like 90% of it, and then definitions. Now, the counting part is really easy. What we're going to focus on today are the definitions, these definitions of intervals. So if we just start looking at C, Then D is the second, or it's the interval of a second. And then E would be the interval of a third. F would be the interval of fourth. And it's just following those numbers, right? It's just basic counting. That's step one. You need to really understand that really well before you can move on to the other more confusing definitions, like a minor second, minor sixth, major sixth, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, augmented fifth, those types of things. So even from any other note, let's say I start with E, if I want to know what a fourth from E is, I still have to count those notes. So E, F would be 2, G would be 3, and then A would be 4. Now, we're not quite worried about what kind of 4 yet. We're getting there. Let's move on to the definition portion of this. How do we know if something is a major second, a minor third, a perfect fourth, a minor sixth, a major seventh? How do we figure that out without trying to memorize several different things? Remember, this is the major scale, okay? We can use that knowledge to our advantage. So, what type of second do we think we have here? This is the major scale. So we're going to have a major second. How about this? This is the third in the major scale. I wonder what it's going to be. It's going to be the major third. Okay? How about the fourth to F? Now, fourths and fifths are a little bit unique. I'm going to scoot on down here. The fourth and fifth intervals in the major scale are called perfect. So P4 and then P5. And I'm going to keep working my way down. A, sixths and sevenths, again, major sixth and then major 7. So major scales have major intervals and a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. Now this is really powerful if you understand the major scale really well, which is why it's a great idea to have something in front of you with all of the major keys on it, like, again, my music theory cheat sheet. All of the major scales are written out there for you. If you know the major scale and then you understand this, you are well on your way to understanding every single interval. Now let's take something like this interval of a major sixth, C to A. And what happens if we move the A down a half step? So C to A flat. So C to A flat, now it's not a major sixth because that's C to A by the definition of the major scale, so then we would just call that a minor sixth. See, we're comparing all of our intervals to the major scale. Let's do another one. Let's do C to F. We said that's a perfect fourth, but what about C to F sharp? So F sharp is going to be up a half step from F. We call that an augmented fourth. An augment, to augment, means to make bigger. So we are augmenting the fourth in that sense. We made the perfect fourth interval a bit bigger. Let's do another common one, C to G, which is a perfect fifth. Now, we can have an augmented fifth as well, which would be C to G sharp, okay? Augment 5. We could also have a G flat in here, which is, yes, the same note in harmonically as F sharp, but in this case, we would call this a diminished, to make smaller, a diminished fifth. So sometimes there's a little bit of crossover there. Now, before we do some more examples, we're going to talk about the common interval definitions that we have. So seconds are usually only major or minor, again, just separated by a half step. Same with thirds, either major or minor. Fourths typically are either perfect or they're made a bit bigger. They are augmented. Fifths can kind of go one of three directions. In the middle, they are perfect, and then made bigger up a half step, they are augmented, or sometimes they are brought down a half step, they are diminished. Sixth are also either major or minor, and sevenths are also major or minor. Now, if you're reading through like a music theory textbook, you'll also see examples of an augmented second, or maybe an augmented sixth, and maybe some different ones as well. But these are the most common. In our typical everyday language of music theory, these are going to give you the answer 99% of the time. Now let's take a look at some examples not from C. Again, we're going to compare everything to our major scale. So let's say the interval in question is this, B to F sharp. First thing I want to do is write all of those notes, okay? B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and then back to B. And if I number that, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, F is on the fifth note. So starting off, this is a fifth. We don't know what type of 5 yet, but we're going to figure that out here in a second. Now, the next thing would be, what is the B major scale? Of course, you can look in my guide, or if you already know off the top of your head, the B major scale has 5 sharps. C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, and then A sharp. And we know that the major scale has everything as either a major or a perfect interval. So then F sharp occurs in the B major scale. That distance is going to be a perfect fifth, even though it's an F sharp. And this is where a lot of the confusion happens. Okay, so B to F, if I count to 5, does that make it a perfect fifth? But does the accidental, does it mean it's not perfect? No, it really comes down to just distances. And we could backtrack and we could take a look at the chromatic scale again. But again, if we just sort of speed up the process in our brains and realize that major scales, everything major or perfect on fourths and fifths, it gets you there a lot faster. And it gets you thinking about music in a much more organic way. These are the things that I think about when I'm playing and talking about music. Let's do a couple more. Let's do E flat to D flat. Okay? So let's just write our notes, E flat, F, G, A, B, C, D, and then E, we'll just make it flat again. It is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th note. D falls on the 7th note, and let's fill in the gaps with our E flat major scale, which has a B flat and an A flat as well as our E flat. Now, D is the naturally occurring 7th, so D is the major 7th in E flat, or according to E flat, but we have a D flat. So then that distance is actually going to be a minor. We brought it down a half step. That's a minor 7th. Or if we're talking about the number system, we could also say that it's flat 7. Let's do another one. Let's do F sharp to A. So again, we're going to write F sharp and then just the letter names G, A, B, C, D, E, and then F sharp. All right, now 1, 2, 3. F sharp to A is some type of third, but what's the F sharp major scale? F sharp major scale has a G sharp, an A sharp, a C sharp, a D sharp, and then yes, the ever convoluted E sharp note. So if F sharp to A sharp is the major third, because it's out of our major scale, A is going to make it a what? That's right, a minor third, or of course, number system, we would call it flat 3. Wash, rinse, and repeat for all of your other intervals. After you do this a couple times, you'll realize really how simple intervals can be if we build it up from a foundation of understanding the major scale really well. I talk a lot about avoiding islands of information when we're learning music. We don't want to learn intervals as something separate from chords, as something separate from scales, as something separate from modes, and yada, yada, yada. We want to stack all of our knowledge on top of itself, and that's why learning intervals this way is going to be more beneficial for you in the long run. Remember to hit the link in the description below to download my Essential Music Theory cheat sheet if you want a fantastic foundation on how to master music theory. If you like content like this, be sure to hit those buttons. My name is Matthew Dale, and I'll see you on the next one.